Mary Sabatino. I'm the Vice President of the Gallery, and I'm delighted to welcome you all here and also to have the opportunity to introduce two extraordinary figures in our art community and the world community, Alfredo Jaar, who needs no introduction, as they say, and Carlos Basualdo, and also an old dear friend who Alfredo introduced me to 20 years ago. So Alfredo Jaar is an artist, an architect, and a filmmaker. And through his long career, he has pioneered a hybrid art making of installation which speaks about resistance and hope. Alfredo has won many awards. He's the only artist to have received the Hasselblad Award, the MacArthur, and the Hiroshima Peace Prize. His exhibition history is too long to recount, but probably he's exhibited in museums in every continent that has a museum. And here in his, I can't even count, but this is, Alfredo and I have been working together since 1994, and we've done many beautiful projects, none quite like this one, The Temptation to Exist. Carlos Basualdo is the Keith and Catherine Sachs curator of contemporary art. I'll take my mask off, sorry, just a second, so sorry. Of the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Many of you saw the amazing pavilion he did for the United States in 2006 or nine for Bruce Nauman. Most recently, he curated another beautiful show, which I was privileged to see, of Bruce Nauman at the Dungana in Venice. He also has recently curated Jasper Johns at the Philadelphia Museum in cooperation with the Whitney, and has been on the curatorial advisory for many Documentas, Venices, and other exhibitions. And so please join me in welcoming both of them and witnessing, I would say not listening, but witnessing their conversation.
Thank you for being here. Can you hear us? Yes. Well, it's a very, of course, it's always a great privilege and a joy to talk to Alfredo, and I've been having that privilege for many years now, and there's no time in which I am talking with Alfredo that I don't learn something. So I think this will be, I'm hoping it will be a great learning experience. And I hope that it will. And this is a special moment, I think. I mean, Alfredo has many special moments, but I think that this is there's a great coincidence of having this beautiful installation here, and also an extraordinary installation that Alfredo is showing at the Whitney Biennial that some of you might have seen. For those of you who have not, I strongly recommend that you see it, because the works are very, very different, but they are both in its laconism. Alfredo is extremely loquacious, and both represent two very distinct modes in which Alfredo thinks and works. And every time that Alfredo works, thinking is involved for sure. And I would say that this is a very good example of that. We decided to talk a little bit about the Whitney. I was very moved when I see it, because I saw in a work that is in a way very economic, as I say. I spoke about laconism, and there's a desire for economy in Alfredo. There's a desire for silence. I think that is very present in this installation as well. But that desire of silence comes always as an attitude of respect towards you, and respect towards the subjects with which he is working. And I think that the finding the proper distance between his work, his own position as an author, and the position of the viewer, and the position of the subject of the work, I think has been key to Alfredo. And I think that for those of us who have been fortunate enough to witness the long arc of his work, it's truly amazing to see how he seems to have found a perfect spot. And a perfect spot, I mean, in the sense of a very fragile but strong balance. I would say a state of equilibrium, but with all the movement that is involved in the act of balancing. When Alfredo described this work to me, he said that there were two parts. He said that there's a red light in one of them, and you will see it's an empty space and there's a red light, and then there's a sort of marvelous, harmonic, but cacophonous space that serves as a sort of counterpost. What I didn't know is that the light was not just light, but it was, emanating from words. And I know that at the beginning they're hard to read. They require a little bit of attention, which I think puts us in the right mood. I think that is as if we would be invited to cross a threshold. And I think in the work of Alfredo, there's always a threshold to cross in order to be closer to the subject of the work. And once we cross that threshold, we read it, and the text calls for an attitude towards the entirety of our condition, a sort of, I would say, a mournful attitude to the entirety of our condition. We will all agree that it's possibly the right attitude, although it is such a hard attitude to have. And when Alfredo was describing the work to me, he said that he was, as he always is, very deliberate. The choice of type in the letter, which he altered, so he elongated the type, and then the sequencing of the neons. And as you see that they are interconnected by these cables that have somewhat a shape that he said could be thought as tears. So we would say the work is tearful, but I think that they evoke tears as much as evoke waves somehow, right? The title of the installation is The Temptation to Exist, and the temptation to exist, it doesn't even present ourselves as a temptation, because when we had it, we already existed. The condition of being tempted is to exist, and the condition to exist is the ceaselessness, the endlessness of our being present to ourselves, which we can say, it's like a little bit being in the sea, being in a sea of existence, being subjected to the wave of existence. The first question that I had for Alfredo was about where does this text come from, and how did you find it?
Yeah. Thank you, Carlos. This is a quote from Seneca. Seneca was a Stoic philosopher in the Roman Empire. And I felt for the last few years that Stoicism is perhaps one possible alternative to what's happening around us. Stoics see the world, at least try to see the world clearly. And they also clearly see the world as it should be, as it can be. And they do everything in their lives in order to achieve that. And as you know, Stoics had an ethical position towards life. And they announced that they were interested in 4 particular virtues: wisdom, courage, justice, and moderation. Sadly, exactly the virtues that we are lacking today. And so I wanted to, as an architect that makes art, architects respond to the context. So that's what I do as an artist. I've never done a single work that is just a product of my imagination. It's always responding to the context. So at this moment in time, I wanted to respond to the context, a context of desolation, of sadness, of war, of tragedies, of manipulation of the news, of the media. So many extraordinary events happening around us. We just went through 2 years of COVID. But not only COVID and suffering, and I was in New York, which was the epicenter of the suffering the first few months, but more than 100 countries never received a single vaccine. There was an apartheid of vaccine, which is totally unacceptable, despicable. And then as we were coming out of COVID, a war started in Europe. And we had already 75 million refugees around the world, so now we have added another 10 more millions.
So, but it's interesting to me that you have always worked with images, and I would say that in many ways, your work is very, very much an interrogation of what images can do and what they cannot do. What are they, what do we allow them to say, and what we ask them not to say. But the inaugural moment of this exhibition is devoid of images.
Exactly. As an artist, I've never been afraid to say, I don't know. I just don't know. And in a moment like this, I just don't know what to do. I don't know what to do as an artist. How can we react to this? As I said in the press release, it's an impossible question. What can I do under these circumstances, under this state of affairs? So I wanted to create this space of desolation, of sadness, of melancholy, of loss. As you know, red is a very special color, very meaningful. It's the color of life, it's a color of love, but it's also the color of rage, the color of warning, of danger. So it's a very, it's full of meaning, this color. And so this is my confession, my impotence in front of this reality that we live. And I was not afraid to do it. I've had enough exhibitions around and I wanted to take one more risk. I said, okay, there is nothing else I can do right now. So that's why this empty space with just these words. And
the beauty of art is that even by saying no, you're saying yes. And even if the work, it's mournful, there is a profound affirmation in the work. I mean, it is.
That's
right?
What I hope that will be read. So parallel to this emptiness, this sadness, I wanted to create a little space of resistance, a space of hope. So that's where you will see the counterpoint to this. You will see more than 100 works by artists of different generations, from Asia, from Africa, from Latin America, from Europe, from this country. And they're all shouting, they're all creating models of thinking the world. There's a belief in that culture can affect change. This is coming from Gramsci, and you will see many drawings of Gramsci. You will see many photographs of Pasolini, who was my hero. He was the model of the intellectual I wanted to be. He was not only a filmmaker, but a poet, a writer, a polemicist, a critic, someone who wanted to talk to Italy and to Europe in the middle of the times he was living. So it's a space, I wanted to create a space of energy, of joy, and of critical thinking. So that's the idea. And why over there and not here? Exactly because this is for me what I feel about the world today. And the art world is a small world. It's really, I've always felt that we live in a little world. It's almost a world of fiction. It's a world of fantasy. And I'm trying to get out of that world. So I always have a foot in and a foot out. So I wanted to show roughly the proportion that exists between the world and the world of culture, which is this little space. But that space is about to blow up with ideas, with thinking. And so it's an homage to those artists that are in there. It's a celebration of life, but also of critical thinking. That is the idea.
So let me ask you about, let me take a slightly different angle and talk a little bit about what I believe are almost autobiographical components, both in this installation and at the Whitney. Let me tell you what's in my mind. Mm-hmm. So when we saw together the small room, I don't know how many of you have seen it already. You can spend quite some time there, and the gallery has made these beautiful guides to all the works there. I'm sure that you will recognize many of those, but others not. What it struck me was that the configuration of artists, meaning artists from Italy and Latin America and the United States all together, it made so much sense. But it's a configuration that I believe it's very unique to a certain way of looking at the world and the world of art history from a perspective that I would describe as non-hegemonical, a perspective that I would describe is not anchored either in the US or in Western Europe. So for me, what I saw besides this joyous cacophony of voices that are very strong, but very powerful at the same time, was Alfredo's history. I mean, there are many works there that are earlier works that you did. I think that they're presided by this picture of you as a magician. I think that the figure of the magician is possible that would transmit nothing into something, right? An affirmation out of negation, which is what you've been doing sustainably for so many years. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to know how much of that space is, it's about you. How much do you recognize yourself?
Mm-hmm. Well,
there?
Of course, every work of an artist is a kind of self-portrait, and perhaps this is the most it's the closest thing to a self-portrait that I've ever done. So of course some of my work's there, and my earliest work in the exhibition is a piece I did in Chile. I was studying architecture. I didn't know I was going to become an artist. And I wanted to commemorate the military coup. So I had just discovered letraset. Letraset are these plastic letters that you use to write on floor plans, on plans in architecture. And I had a piece of black board, and I wrote 11 September 1973. And I've always been kind of very symmetrical, and so I discovered that I had written these 3 dates, that date on the left side of the panel, and there is some space left on the right, and I wanted something really symmetrical. So I thought I'm going to put something else, and I thought I'm going to put the time of the first bomb that destroyed the La Moneda Palace, where Allende died, the president of Chile. As you know, this military coup happened on September 11, 1973. It's a coincidence that we had another September 11 here. And as you might know also, this coup was sponsored by the CIA, and it was courtesy of Nixon and Kissinger. So anyway, I put that, and that is the first work, the earliest work of mine in that exhibition. So, and everything else grows around this. So the work I did in Chile during the dictatorship, and then works by other artists in Chile during the dictatorship. And then there are many works that really are works that I adore, that if I had to make a list of 50 important works in my life, half of them are here. And I can mention a few, but you will see a hole on the wall. It's a 1 meter by 1 meter hole, and it reveals plywood that was behind them. And it's a work by Lawrence Biller from 1969, where he wanted to reveal the context. So that work is here. We have my favorite works of all time. It's done during the dictatorship in Brazil by Silvio Meirelles. It's called Insertions into Ideological Circuits. It's an extraordinary work of a simplicity that is absolutely vertigo-like. He would go to a bar and drink a Coke. And then when he finishes Coke, without people seeing him, he would apply a little adhesive on this bottle with text. And this text is in very thin white letters. So you don't see them until you fill up the bottle again. So at the time, in the 70s, the bar would send the bottles of Coke that were empty, that had been used, to the factory. They were washed, they were filled up again, and sent back to the bars. So only when the Coke was inside, then you would be able to see the text. So that was his way to circulate messages and circulate them among in Rio, where he lived during the dictatorship. So they would say, "Yankees go home," etc., etc. And there are many works of this kind, of this caliber, in the exhibition that I wanted to bring in. There is a work that is central to the exhibition. Is a condensation cube by Hans Haeckel. It's another work about context. The work you will see changes according to the temperature, to our movement, and so it is vibrating with us, and so reflecting the context, our times. And I could go on. The show is dedicated to Letizia Battaglia, a photographer from Italy, from Palermo. And Letizia unfortunately passed away when I was working on the exhibition. And so she had, I had requested her 6 portraits of Pasolini. And so the last thing she did was signing this portrait that she sent us for my exhibition, and then she passed away. So I dedicated the show to her. Letizia was the most important photographer in the last 50 years of history of Italy. She fought against patriarchy and she won, and she fought against the mafia and she won. She had threats against her life for almost all her life from the mafia because she photographed them. So
there are, what is striking to me is that there are so many bodies there, different kinds of bodies, of all ages, of all races. Here in this section there's no bodies. No, we are here as bodies, but the exhibition seems to call for a sort of disembodied experience. And then we go to the Whitney and we see in the film bodies as well. But most importantly, I think, is that we very elegantly and very respectfully that you put us in the positions of those bodies in the image. And when the fans started to work and we feel the sound and we kind of feel in our own flesh, what does it mean to be subjected? And the word subject comes from subjection. So subject is always that is produced by power, by some power or some combinations of power. And I think that this relationship to power is also what your work, I spoke about images and an interrogation of images, but you also always being an interrogation of power. What kind of conditions that power determines so that we can see or not see? How does power allow us to see or prohibit us from seeing? This interesting for me is that there is in these works that fortunately we can see in the same city, there is this passage from the disembodied to the multitude, the choral multitude of bodies of the past, because most of those artists have passed already and are no longer with us, to the feeling that we are the protagonist of the work in the Whitney. Right? So all these different forms of incarnation that the work seems to basically bring together.
Yes, thank you for pointing out that. Because I never studied art and I'm an architect, I feel free. I feel totally free. I declared very early on, I don't know what art is, so I'll do what I need to do. And so for each project I give myself a program and I work with ideas. For me, art has always been 99% thinking and 1% making. So I don't make things, I just spend most of my time researching and thinking. And at the end of a long process, I articulate ideas. I try to articulate ideas, so that's what I do. So that freedom that architecture gave me is in my work. I mean, when people analyze my work in the last 10 years, they think it's 10 different artists. Because I feel free, and in this case, again, I felt free to do this, which seems to be almost nothing, but at the same time, it is this kind of nothingness I wanted to convey to my audience.
But I also think that it's a reflection, Alfredo, on the different ways in which we exist in the world. The disembodied existence that we've been subjected more and more in the last, with the pandemic having been reduced to some sort of virtual ghosts, the memories, the past, the sort of dialogues that we have with ourselves as we were and the people who made us who we are. and then our being in the world. And our being in the world is always being confronted to or confronted by. And I think that your work has always also been about that confrontation to a large degree.
Yes, absolutely. And I really believe that artists create models of thinking the world, and each exhibition is a model of thinking the world. And that's what we do. And I insist, I believe that culture can affect change, but we are going through a very special moment where I feel impotent at the same time. So I wanted to convey both things at the same time.
Well, I would have to say that lack of power expresses it is expressed very powerful here, very powerful here. So I think that I don't want to monopolize this conversation. So I would be happy to listen to your questions, and I think we both would be happy. I don't know if you had a chance to see the smaller room, or
No, we haven't.
but we could walk towards that direction if you'd like. Yes, excellent. Yes, and we can continue the conversation there. And if I may say something along those lines, which I completely agree, I think that the work is exemplary in its cohesiveness, and I think that you are an extremely thoughtful and meticulous thinker in that sense. But it is also true that, with time, you have moved towards the somatic has become more and more present. I mean, I was just telling Alfredo, if you're there in that space, I know that we all felt a relief moving into this life, because it becomes a moment which is unbearable. The feeling of being there is unbearable. You really feel it, as the people who were there felt it, as people who were in Chile manifesting felt it, or in Argentina, or in so many parts of the world. And I have to think about, Bruce, in terms of that relationship between the somatic, because I think in both your works it's very present, yeah. But the question...
No, I mean, I just, because I was also thinking about, the digital, now, I always thought of Alfredo as someone who's been so consistently reflecting on the power of the documentary image, And even when he forecloses that image, even when he cancels the image, there's a reflection around the documentary image, the reality of the image, though again, either blinding light or again, you just get a glimpse for a tiny part of a second. So you have been obviously engaged in thinking about the power of images, but also their elusiveness. And I just wonder I was wondering how the digital, how the complete colonization of our lives by the digital may have affected your thoughts on that.
I have not reacted directly in a work upon these new technologies that have invaded us, that are changing our lives. It's something that I'm thinking about all the time because I study the media landscape. And of course, these new technologies are the ones that are bringing it to us now. For the Whitney project, it was thanks to these new media that I was able to do this work, because I didn't attend this manifestation in DC on June 1st. I saw 15 seconds on TV, and I was so shocked by the presence of helicopters that I identify as death flights from Argentina and Chile, where they killed people. And by the way, this is something that the military from Latin America learned here in the School of the Americas. And so I decided to do this work, and the internet was the tool that I used in order to create this work. So with my assistant, we spent months looking for snapshots and little films taken by people with their phones. And so we accumulated almost 3 hours of this. And then we studied it, and when I found enough material that I thought I can use it to tell the story, then we contacted the authors and we purchased the rights of these things. I do not appropriate anybody's work. We purchased the copyrights in order to do this work. So these new technologies helped me to create this work. But that's as far as I've gone in the use of the new technologies in my work. I haven't. And things are in flow, in a constant flow, and we are on like moving sands, really. Like I said here, I don't know what can be said or done, but just I'm observing it.
I was telling Alfredo that the title of the show evokes to me as something very Shakespearean, that to be or not to be of Hamlet, and he pointed out that this is another quote. Can you tell us a little bit?
Yeah, the title is a book by Emil Cioran. He's a Romanian writer that is one of my favorite writers. He's known as the poet of pessimism. He's really pessimist. He's someone that you feel is going to commit suicide in every line. And I'm a very depressing character myself, so I identify with him, but he's so much more depressing than I am that he cheers me up. And he, for example, he believes that culture can affect change, and that's why he's a writer. But at the same time, he says that every book he has written is a suicide postponed. So that kind of a dark mind. But I've always liked him very much, and I'm a big fan. So the title of the book is one of his books, and that's why I selected for this exhibition, because art here offers an answer to what's here. So that it's a very simple operation, but that's what I was thinking about.
Thank you, Alfredo.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.